So welcome everyone. I am Tim Constant, the Associate Director of Teacher Education and Outreach at the Holocaust Memorial Center in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And I'm really excited that you're joining us today to hear about and see some of the resources that our teacher advisory group has developed. And they're gonna take you through some of these sources. So with us, we have three members of our teacher advisory group, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves and where they teach. So Angela, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm Angela Chea. I teach at Dexter High School. I am finishing up my 22nd year teaching. I teach AP US history, and I've taught that for almost all the years that I've been teaching at Dexter High School. And we started up about 8 years ago an IB diploma program. And so I teach IB world history through the diploma program. And this is my second year being in the teacher advisory group.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. I am Michelle Cureton. I am a high school history teacher at Lake Orion High School. I've done that for 17 years. I teach some pretty cool classes, history of world religions, history of ethnic and gender studies, world history, and African American history. I am also my district's diversity and equity coordinator, and this is my second year of having the pleasure of serving on the teacher advisory group with the Holocaust Museum. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Great, thank you. And Dan, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dan St. Laurent. I'm currently in my 9th year of teaching American history and government at Lakeshore High School in St. Clair Shores. I'm in my 2nd year with TAG, and I am a 2016 Transatlantic Fellow.
Great. So thank you again for joining us. In the chat, I included a link to the Google slide deck that we're going to go over here. And what I'm going to want to do first is I want to provide you just a quick overview of this project that the Teacher Advisory Group Cohort 1, which was last school year, did. And it was our very first year of organizing a teacher advisory group, and it was in the Detroit metro area. And now in our 2nd year of our teacher advisory group, we have actually 4 different teacher advisory groups that are geographically spread around Michigan. And actually for our cohort 3 advisory group for next school year, we're having discussions about having one very large teacher advisory group that would be encompass all of Michigan. So we're really excited about it. So our 3 of our teacher advisory group members have introduced themselves. They had mentioned that they were part of cohort 1, and they're also now currently on cohort 2. And the current cohort of the teacher advisory group is looking at our artifacts because of everything that happened with COVID in the pandemic. School groups weren't able to come to the Holocaust Memorial Center anymore. So what we've been focusing on at the center is digitizing our artifacts and developing resources, instructional resources, and learning resources around those. And that's what the teacher advisory group is focusing on right now, is looking at the artifacts that are being digitized and what kind of lessons and instructional resources can be developed around those. But last year, we were focusing on these objectives. We were brainstorming and looking at recommending new educational programs and resources that teachers need and want. And that group looked at and evaluated our current and proposed educational programming to make sure that we at the Holocaust Center was meeting the needs and the wants of the teachers and the schools and the districts. And so we looked at the teacher advisory group members as the experts. They're the experts that are in the classroom and working with students daily. And so we really relied on them to educate us and tell us what do we need to develop. And then the teacher advisory group then developed those resources. And so they informed us on different educational trends and also advocated for our educational programming and resources. So with those objectives, what we decided to do is we brainstormed what product or products that we could develop for teachers for Holocaust instruction. And our 3 advisory group members are going to show those to you and introduce those to you and show you where to find those resources so you can use those in your classroom. But where we started was with these 9 pedagogical principles for effective Holocaust instruction. And so I want you to take a look at these here. And as I go through these in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, if one of these sticks out to you, as you're like, wow, I think that one's really important, please put that into the chat. And also put into the chat if there's one that you feel that you're like, oh, you know, I didn't think about that, but I should probably focus more on that pedagogical principle. Put that into the chat as well, and that will help us to drive our instruction and discussion today. So we start with defining terms is the first pedagogical principle. Then looking at the background of anti-Semitism. Contextualizing history is the third principle. The fourth is teaching the human story. The fifth is using primary source materials. The sixth principle is making the Holocaust relevant. The seventh is encouraging inquiry-based learning and critical thinking. The eighth is fostering empathy. And the ninth is ensuring a supporting learning environment. So I want you to take a look at these 9. And in the chat, or you can unmute if you would like, tell us what one of these that really sticks out to you and why does it? And you had mentioned teaching the human story. Yeah, that's a principle that we focus on heavily. And why does that one really stick out to you?
I think I don't think students often get or grasp the reality of what happened unless we make it a human story. I see someone wrote foster empathy. I was thinking that too.
Yeah. Yeah, Carla mentioned fostering empathy, and I think those go together, right? So, and I agree with you. One of the reasons why at the Holocaust Center and the Teacher Advisory Group really focused on number 4 is you could easily make an argument that the strongest way to foster empathy is to teach the human story, right? And so, and there's lots of different ways to do that. And you'll see the education guides that the advisory group developed and they're going to share with you so you can use in your classroom. You'll see the different ways and the different primary sources that they use to be able to tell that story. So yeah, fostering empathy and teaching the human story, very important. Amanda, you had mentioned that you often take number 1 for granted, right? I think a lot of people do, right? Defining terms. It's such a foundational thing to do. And it's important to be able to define these terms because sometimes terms are interchangeably used, even though these terms that are interchangeably used are very different, right? So great, I'm so glad that you identified these. So I want you to think about this is if you just change a few words here, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that these are just effective principles for great instruction, right? So if you just change a few words, it's just not specifically for the Holocaust, but it's just effective principles for instruction. Right? So that's why we had started with this and looking at these. So then what we did is we got into looking at the themes of our tour. So if you've been on one of our docent-led tours at the museum, all of our docent-led tours focus on these 7 core themes. And so the education guides that are going to be shared with you, we looked at these themes, and these guides addressed maybe 2 or 3 of them in each guide. So we look at number 1, the human story, right? We put that as number 1 because we think that that one is very powerful and probably one of the most important. A second theme is choice, right? That the Holocaust was not inevitable, right? It happened based on people's choices, right? And these were horrible things that people did to each other, but it's human beings committing atrocities against other human beings. And they had a choice, and that was the choice that they had made. The third theme that we focused on was dehumanization. And that's a key one. And I really want you to think about and focus on that one, because in workshops that we do at the center, one of the things that I always tell teachers is, if you teach other genocides, is the one thing that all genocides have in common is dehumanization. So there's always a form of dehumanization. Another theme that we focused on was light in the darkness. You know, the Holocaust is so dark and can be so traumatizing that one of the things that we try to focus on is these stories of light, right? That's in the darkness, and also stories of resistance and resilience. So that leads into number 5. We also focus on indifference and how people view each other. So that's another theme. And then one that a lot of people don't think about when they teach the Holocaust: returning to life, right? What happened after the Holocaust, right? How do people return to life? So I want you to think about those themes. Let me open it up real quick before I hand it over to our teacher advisory group to share the resources that they created. I asked you if any of the pedagogical principles stood out to you. Is there a theme that stands out to you that you're like, wow, I didn't think about that, or one that you're like, I think about that, and I think that that's a really important and powerful theme?
I would say that to me, the light in the darkness is important. I think it's easy as social studies teachers to want to really drive home, how tragic this whole event was, to help kids understand. And I think sometimes we forget to focus on the positives within that story, and bringing all of those, stories and concepts to life.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's such a dark time in history, right? That a lot of times we don't focus on light in the darkness, right? And so I'm so glad that you pointed out that theme. I think that's one that's really important to focus on.
I would say number 7 also, the same idea that there's something out of it that we have to look to, that's better, that we learned, or that we are going to make better because of this horrible thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. What did we learn from this, right? About ourselves as human beings. And that returning to life, just hearing the stories of people that survived the Holocaust and how they were able to, in certain ways, to pick up the pieces, right, and lead productive, successful lives, is a really important story to tell. So Jean, thank you for pointing that out. So with those pedagogical principles and those themes, the teacher advisory group developed 7 Holocaust education companion guides that were focused on contextualizing primary sources. And Angela put into the chat the link that goes directly to our website of where these resources, these education guides are that you can download. And I'm going to hand it over to the teacher advisory group members, and they're going to highlight 3 of them. So Dan, I think you're going to go first, right?
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Tim hit the nail on the head for us, saying that we wanted to teach the human story. And we had a really great group of teachers with a wide variety of experience, backgrounds, representing a variety of districts. And our goal was to create materials and mini lessons for history teachers, social studies teachers that are new to the topic of teaching the Holocaust. Not everybody has the same educational background. We wanted to create materials for the person who's teaching it for the first time, or even English teachers as well that could use some supplemental materials. Essentially what we wanted to do was create lessons to help reinforce the great things that teachers are already doing in the classroom. I'm going to pull up my contextualization here in a moment, but I have the testimonial of an Auschwitz survivor, Paula Liebkowitz. I selected her testimonial because with my students, and I think it might be the same for everybody here, that seems to resonate the most with my students. That seems to be the connection they make, hearing somebody telling their story. So I'm going to go ahead and pull mine up for us to take a look at here. Okay. So when you take a look at the links that were provided in the chat, you can take a look at these companion guides that we have, and you see the one that I'm pulling up right now from Paula Liebkowitz, the Auschwitz survivor. And it will take us to the video clip. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I want to play about a minute's worth so you can see the quality of these videos and how well they can work in your classroom. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Oops.
As I was relating it.
Hey Dan, could you turn up the volume on your end a little bit, because I can't hear it.
I have it up all the way, but I'll double check for us, Tim.
That I had a particular wonderful story about a soldier picking me up, sitting down and rocking me in his arms, and the tears were just flowing down his face. And I can never forget that as long as I live. Just to look at him and figuring in my head, you mean there's somebody out there cares about me? It was the first time I had this kind of feeling. I thought only in your mother or somebody, but somebody caring about me. It was overwhelming. He wanted to share his food. And he had slonina, which is like slab bacon. And I showed him my stash of bread, and I said, no, that's all I want, it's the bread. Look how much I have. But I did take a little piece of his black bread, had that Russian black bread, but he didn't have very much. The soldiers didn't look like the Germans all dressed up. They looked kind of tattered and worn and beaten up. They did not look the same like the Germans do with that.
So I don't want to play the whole thing for you, but I just wanted to have you guys get an idea of what this looks like. So when you open up one of these companion guides, it gives you all the information that you would need. So it starts off by telling you the title of the source, who's actually speaking and telling their testimony. It tells you where it comes from. And now it gives us a source description. It tells about her liberation from Auschwitz, by the Red Army and what she faced after liberation. There's a biography of the survivor as well that tells her life up to and then after liberation. Then it gives you all the technical readout that you would want to know to see if this is appropriate for your classroom. We have determined that her video testimonial is appropriate for grades 6 through 12 and even after high school. If you're looking for specific topics to touch on in your classroom, we identify that this helps with the topics of rescuers, which we saw in the video, survivors, liberators, children of the Holocaust. As Tim was mentioning in the beginning, the theme that fit with the HMC's tours, this fits with the human story and returning to life. For those of you who really want to get a little bit more technical, we have our connections to the social studies framework and the C3 framework. So if you're looking for something specifically to plug into a need of your classroom, you can see those identified in the descriptions. When we contextualize the source, we provide prior information that could help the first-time teacher to this topic, or to the English teacher who maybe doesn't have the history background. It gives a lot of information to prepare a teacher to answer questions from their students. We provide a list of additional resources as well that you may want to use to go beyond this contextualization. And now what most people want to know, how can I use this in my classroom? What type of length would this be? This could be something that you use to kick off a lesson in class, or it could be the entire class itself. This is something that could be from anywhere from a 15-minute mini lesson to taking up the entire class. It provides some questions for the teacher to use maybe before or after showing the video to drive discussion. You know, what emotions did you notice? What event is she recalling? We can see a range of emotions from her as she's telling her story of leaving, that somebody cared for her, how she valued the bread over the bacon. We can see that human emotion in this human story. We can also find out other sources that it will take the students to, or teachers to as well. I'd like to pass things on to my colleague, Michelle Cureton, who will tell you about her fantastic project.
I guess I am next. Hello, everyone. So I am going to share my screen with you shortly. But first, I want to let you know again, just what Dan said, our entry point with contextualizing what we're going to show you was foundational information and knowledge to help teachers who are already teaching about the Holocaust to easily get their hot little hands on some good foundational information, and also for an ELA teacher, or even, I'm going to throw this out there, a science teacher or anyone who'd like to teach some aspect of the Holocaust. So I chose a photograph, and I chose a photograph because, let me get on here and share this with you. I chose a photograph because I believe that our students, and I know my students, are very visual learners, and I know that's an important part of it. So I just want to show you, if you can see on my screen, the way you get to our teacher companion guides. Here's the teacher advisory group. There's great information that you can learn about the advisory group, as well as the people involved. There's the teacher resources page here. So if you scroll down, you can see where all of the teacher companion guides are. My companion guide is the Hanukkah menorah. So I'm going to click on that. I'm just checking in to make sure you can see the page okay. Can you see the page okay, everyone?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So before I do anything, I want to show you this photograph, and I'd like for us to have just a talking moment, please. What do you see? What do you think? And what do you wonder when you see this particular photograph? I'm going to come in. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Anyone like to just quickly share with us? What do you see?
I
Carla,
think
hi.
that it's odd that we're seeing the Nazi flag in the background, and
Nice.
that it still seems to sit in the window so freely.
Yes, thank you. All right, can someone tell me what you think? What do you think about this photograph when you see it? Come on, teachers. We do this all day. Come on. I got to practice my wait time, huh? What do you think? There are no wrong answers, historians. You can just throw it out. What do you think?
Maybe resistance or defiance.
I love it. Thank you, Carla and Veronica. All right, and my last one. What do you wonder, historians? What do you wonder when you see this photograph?
I wonder if it's visible from the outside.
I'm sorry, Ann, you went out just a tad.
I wonder if the menorah is not visible from the outside.
Ooh, nice. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Anne. And the purpose of me doing this is because one major aspect of this photograph is using something called the visual thinking strategy. And that's something that I would encourage all of you to use when you're using a photograph. It gives your students the opportunity to think about what they're seeing, analyze their learning, and then share their learning and their thinking. And so it's a pretty powerful tool to use with this photograph. And why in particular did I use this photograph? Two reasons. One, it was circulating on Twitter. So all of a sudden I see people having conversations about the Holocaust, people you wouldn't think, putting in their opinion and talking about this very powerful photograph. And I think this is the perfect example of resistance, which is one of the themes that this particular photograph covers, is the idea of resistance. So when you enter into your teaching about a photograph, the best way to enter, the best entry point is to have your students to relate to why is it relevant today? It's on Twitter, right? So people are talking about it. And then also, let's visualize our learning by going through a visual thinking strategy. So I'm just going to quickly go through. Dan did a wonderful job. Thank you, Dan, for passing the baton to me so easily. He already kind of went through what this looks like for you. So you don't have to dig and find and search. All of that information, that biographical information, is there for the primary source document. The who, the why, the how, all of that's there for you. When was it published? Who did it? So all of that is there for you to read and to see, so that you can always understand and know what, how authentic your resource is that you're using. So we were very intentional with doing that. Also, again, that's your background information. And some of our topics, we thought that this was a very powerful image, so it worked great in the secondary level. And we've also identified some Holocaust topics and also some themes. The C3 framework is, like I always tell everyone, my absolute jam. So that arc of inquiry is everything. So as you can see, a lot of that's there. You have your standards, but you also have the opportunity to tap into the C3 framework. You can do a lot with a simple photograph because it's so powerful. And then again, it allows the students to make meaning and have those meaningful conversations and dialogue as an entry point, as an exit point, or all the way through. And then when you're contextualizing, if you're that ELA teacher where you're trying to make sure you're not telling a single story, and that happens when you're teaching a novel about the Holocaust, it may be that topic is about survivors, and you're just thinking about, oh, someone survived, yay, good for them. But we want to make sure that, yes, we want to bring that light into the darkness of the Holocaust, but we also have to let our students understand how horrific the experience was. So we don't want them to leave with a single story. There were survivors, that's it, the end. So we want to make sure that this foundational knowledge that we're giving our students and that we're presenting as teachers shows a well-rounded picture of the Holocaust. So, we went in with the 10 stages of genocide, for example, the meaning and significance of the menorah, so that we can contrast that with that Nazi flag. So that juxtaposition of that. So there's a lot of foundational information that teachers don't have to dig and find. It's there for them, right at their fingertips. And then all of the contextualization resources that teachers can use, so they don't have to find that. And I think that's very important because teachers don't want to have to look for information sometimes, especially if it's an unfamiliar topic. They really would like for it to be at their fingertips. And Dan did a great job of showing that. And we also have some additional lesson plan information. So we're thinking for you. So what you can do prior to viewing the photograph, what you can do while viewing the photograph, and also giving you some questions to tap into their higher level thinking and critical thinking skills. And again, to come in a good high level way, but also you want to exit that way as well. And I'd like to share, we started with our visual thinking strategy. So just encouraging and giving some examples of how you can use those strategies. So sometimes you'll hear it as visible or visual. I kind of go back and forth between the two terms, but they're a very effective strategy to use with a photograph. And I have found, because I have shared this with my 9th grade world history students, you can get a lot of information and conversations out of photographs, especially if you say, hey, guess what I saw on Twitter or Instagram or whatever the case may be, because they're, that's intriguing to them that people today are still talking about history. That's all for me. And I'd like to pass it on to Angela.
Hey, Michelle, can I just make one quick comment?
Absolutely.
Before we go to Angela, if you wouldn't mind going back up to the photo.
Yes.
Because since this companion guide focuses, one of the themes is on resistance, correct? It's a form of resistance. I think what this photo is a great example of and can lead a great discussion in with students is the types of resistance.
Yes.
Right? So students, a lot of times I think when they hear the word resistance, they think of armed resistance, right? And there was armed resistance during the Holocaust, but there was also cultural resistance. There was spiritual resistance, right? Which is unarmed resistance. And this is a really great example of that.
Yes,
Right?
and last thing.
Saying, I'm going to resist what that flag's meaning is, what that flag stands for, right? And I'm going to do that by putting this object, which has a significant amount of spiritual and cultural meaning, right, into the window. So I wanted to mention that because since this deals with resistance, it's a great photo to talk about the different types of resistance.
Yes, and one last thing, one of your resources here is all about Jewish resistance here, because we wanted to make sure to show that there was more passive resistance and more active resistance and resistance in general. So thank you, Tim, absolutely.
Great, so Angela, I think over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen just as soon as, there we go. So I chose a poem, and let me pull that up. And so I'm going straight to the website so you can see how easy it is to navigate using the website. And it pulls it up as a PDF. I'm going to shrink it just a little bit so you can see it all on one screen. And one of the things I'll just say, and I wasn't going to say this at first, I was going to maybe mention it a little bit later, but since we're just talking about resistance and spiritual resistance, this poem has different uses in the classroom and different places within a unit that you could use this. And so one of those places that you could use this would be talking about resistance and spiritual resistance, because this poem was written by a boy somewhere between the ages of 11 and 14 in the Theresienstadt ghetto or the transit camp. It's not exactly sure when in that time period and where exactly he was at, but there were people who were actively encouraging Jewish children to write poetry, to draw pictures, to express themselves while they were going through this experience, and they hid them away. And so I will come back to the poem, but since we're on the topic of resistance, let's see. Hold on just a second. Like I said, I wasn't planning going to this specific spot. Okay, so right here in the source description. So there is a book of the poetry which was hidden away and then was discovered later. And actually it wasn't a book, but it was like different pieces of poetry, artwork. Some of it was anonymous, some of it they could trace to people. Some of the people then they could find out, their fate during and after the Holocaust. But then it was created into a book called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. And so that's originally where I came across this poem. But so anyway, so if I was using this poem in a class, one of the things that I would definitely want to do is give the students some time on their own to read the poem. And then perhaps call on the student to read the poem out loud. So I'm going to do that in just a second, have one of you teachers read the poem out loud. And then just ask a few questions about the poem, like what's striking about the poem. And I'm going to do that as well. So let me give you just about 30 seconds to read the poem and prepare. And it's short and it's simple, very easy to read out loud, and also works well in any age level classroom. So you could use this in a 6th, 7th grade classroom. You could use this in a junior or senior classroom, which is the age level that I teach. So go ahead and read the poem. Okay, so now I will call on somebody, and first I will wait for a volunteer, which I always wait first and see if I can get a volunteer. And if not, then I might like wrangle somebody in, maybe my favorite student. So volunteer to read the poem.
I will volunteer.
Thank you, Amanda.
I am a Jew. I am a Jew and will be a Jew forever. Even if I should die from hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people, on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I am proud of my people, how dignified they are. Even though I am suppressed, I will always come back to life.
Thank you, Amanda. And so the next question that I have is, what emotions are you getting from this poem? So what is this person feeling as they're writing this poem? What do they want you to feel?
I think he feels proud to be Jewish.
Okay, proud. I'm pride. And what makes you feel that? Like what lines in the poem give you that sense that he feels pride in being Jewish?
That he will fight for my people and never be ashamed of them.
Okay, thank you.
And he says he's proud.
Yeah, he actually says he's proud, but then in addition to that, I will always fight. I will never be ashamed. So he's stressing it over and over. The next thing that I would ask is, where do you think, so I already told you where he wrote this poem. If I was giving this poem in class, I wouldn't have told them when and where he wrote it right at the beginning. I would ask them to find clues in the poem. So I'll ask you, what clues do you have in the poem towards time and place, where he was writing, when he was writing this?
I would say that talking about dying from hunger gives them a clue that he's somewhere outside of his normal life.
Okay, good. So that this is not, so it could be I Am a Jew. You might think from the title that this is a poem just about everyday Jewish life. It could be at any time period. It could be before the Holocaust, expressing, just life in an average Jewish community. But no, he's saying, even if I should die from hunger, never will I submit. So you have the sense then that, okay, he's experiencing hunger. He's experiencing some kind of trauma, and yet he's working his way through this. You would also get a sense that it's not maybe towards the end, because there's still like this sense of I'm fighting, I'm working through this. It could be like, I'm thinking in terms of like already being, because eventually he does end up in Auschwitz, and he does not survive the Holocaust. But so he's right in the middle of the fight. He's right in the middle of the struggle. And that's why I'm saying this is a good poem if you wanted to do spiritual resistance during the Holocaust. One other way that you could use this poem, you could also use it to talk about pre-war Jewish life. And that's one of the things that I like about the lessons that we picked. We gave you multiple places where you could place it, multiple themes and uses in the classroom. If you were using it to talk about living in the camps and resistance and how people specifically resisted in Theresienstadt, you could click on this resource. And I'll click really quick. And it talks about life in Theresienstadt, and that's the transit camp that he was there. And there's multiple resources, questions, etc. So you don't have to, and that's the other beauty of this. There are so many resources out there. Hold on just a second, let me get back to the screen. There's so many resources out there that you can spend hours and hours and hours just looking for a link to something like a poem. What we tried to provide for you here is we gave you the resource and then we gave you multiple links kind of all there. So if you want to link this to Life in the Ghettos, it's here. If you want to link this to, at the beginning of a unit, everyday life in Eastern Europe, there are these beautiful photographs. And if I were using these in the classroom, and I'm not going to do this because I see that we're running a little bit shorter on time, but I would ask students the same thing that I asked them about the poem. What do you see being expressed? What emotions? What's happening? And I'd also ask them the same questions. When do you think this was? You know, was this, you know, before? Was this during? How do you know? And then just get across the idea of, you know, this is just, you know, everyday life. So you could use this, you know, leading up to the Holocaust, talking about the Jewish communities. You could use this in the middle of the Holocaust unit, talking about life in the ghettos. If you're teaching night, you could use this and link it to life in the town that Elie Wiesel grew up in. And there are pictures of his hometown before the Holocaust. So that's just one of the things that I really enjoy about, like, you know, making up these guides. And one last thing that I want to say, because I'm going to like stop, because I think the other two did a really good job of showing you all the different parts to the companion guides. But I really want to stress that the reason that you only see 7 on the website is the way we envisioned this was that these would be exemplars for teachers, but that this would be a collaborative effort, that teachers would go to the website, that they have an idea for a poem, a short story, a video clip, and they would want to share that with the bigger community of teachers and say, here, I've got this, and this is wonderful, and put it out there for others. So you don't need to create this whole companion guide. You just need to put in the source, put in any ways that you think you might want to use the source in the classroom, any links to like different websites that you think would pair well with the source. And then we, Tim Constant and the people at the Holocaust Memorial Center would do their magic, and it really is magic, and put it all together and create a companion guide that they would then post on their website and then would be shared with other teachers. So I am going to stop there because I am out of time, but I'm going to turn it back over to Tim at this point.
Well, Angela and Michelle and Dan, thank you for you know, showing 3 of the guides. A lot of time, and they will tell you a lot of time was spent talking about what information to put on those guides, the standard format, because one of the things that I share with people a lot is there is so much information on the Holocaust. What's the gold standard, right? What are the sources that you should go to? Because there's so much information out there, right? What's the accurate information? And so For example, the sources that are on those guides that have those links: Yad Vashem, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Echoes and Reflections, Facing History and Ourselves. Those are incredible sources to be able to support those guides. So I want to open up the floor. We have about 5 minutes to see if you have any questions or comments for Angela, Michelle, and Dan, or myself.
I have a general question. So I'm actually going to be teaching the Holocaust next week. When I saw this session, I kind of rearranged my lesson plans so that I could hopefully use some stuff. I just wondered if anybody had any ideas on like how to set the tone going into the week for students.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that question. There's a couple different approaches. One of the approaches that's really important is start with the normal, right? So there was a professor that I met that had explained to me, and she's a storyteller, and her mentor was had told her about this strategy with regards to telling the story of a particular historical event or time period. You can't understand the abnormal unless you understand the normal, right? You can't. So a lot of times people jump right into the Holocaust and the atrocities and the horrors of the Holocaust. So you saw on these guides, some of these guides, pre-war Jewish life. That's where you should start, right? Start with the normal. And Angela had shared with you some photos from Facing History and Ourselves that showed pre-war Jewish life. That's really, really important. So start there. So start with how life was like before. Start with the normal. So then when you start with that, and there's plenty of testimonies, survivor testimonies on echoesandreflections.org. And if one of the teacher advisory group members could put that link into the chat, I would appreciate it. There's testimonies by survivors that talk about how life was like before, right? And that's really powerful. So Amanda, that's where I would start. And that sets the tone.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions? That's a great question. Fantastic question. Any other questions or comments or thoughts maybe about how you would use these education guides? No? All right, so I do want to, in our last minute and a half here, I do want to reiterate something that Angela had mentioned with regards to the reason why there was 7, right? So you can use these guides as is, but also too, you can use it as a template for if there is a particular resource, a primary source, which is, remember, Pedagogical Principle 1, that you could build your own guide around, right? And so it provides a really nice template for you. So with that, I'm going to make a last call for any questions or comments before we leave you. Any other thoughts?
Not for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. Let me put my contact information up on the screen here. So if you have any questions, concerns, if you need any additional resources, or want to know anything more about the Holocaust Memorial Center, such as we're creating these virtual museum experiences rather than tours, right? Because we can't do in-person docent-led tours right now. Please either call me or email me, and I would be happy to help.